Lake Forest, Illinois. A $14 million estate behind iron gates, the kind of house that announces itself before you see it. Inside, a mahogany door closes. A deadbolt clicks. On the other side of that door, a girl stands in the rain with a trash bag and a rusted fishing tackle box, the only thing she was allowed to take. Her father is dead. His lawyer has the will. Her stepmother has everything else. But in a Walmart parking lot 17 days later, the girl opens the tackle box for the first time, presses the false bottom, finds a letter. One word at the top, a name only her father ever used. In Wisconsin, under an abandoned farmhouse no one knows exists, something has been running quietly for 4 years. Waiting. In downtown Chicago, a man in a silver-haired suit checks his watch. The acquisition closes in 24 hours. She just found the key. The morning her father was buried, the rain came down the way it always did in Lake Forest in November. Sideways, cold enough to mean something. Quinn stood at the back of the crowd in a black dress she'd borrowed from a neighbor and shoes that didn't quite fit, and she watched the coffin go down, and she thought about all the things she hadn't said, which was a long list, which had been a long list for 4 years now, which she had been adding to quietly in the back of her mind, the way you added things to a list you knew you'd never actually send. She did not cry. She had done that part already. In her car at 2 o'clock in the morning 3 weeks ago, when the phone rang and the voice on the other end said words she already knew were coming, because she had been bracing for them in some deep and animal part of herself for 4 years. She had pulled into a gas station parking lot, and she had cried until she couldn't anymore. So at the funeral, she just stood in the rain with her hands at her sides and watched the coffin go down and thought, I never took it back. That was the thing. That was the only thing. She had said it to him when she was 15, 2 days after her mother's funeral in the doorway of his study, with her hands balled into fists and her eyes still swollen from 3 days of crying. She had said, I don't have a father since that night. And he had looked at her with an expression she had never fully been able to name. Not anger, not denial, something older than either of those. Something that looked in her memory like a man receiving a sentence he already knew was coming. He had not argued, he had not explained, he had just nodded once and she had walked away, and 4 years later neither of them had ever gone back to that moment, and now neither of them ever would. The coffin reached the bottom of the hole. The priest said words. Quinn stood in the rain. Nadine stood at the front of the crowd with Sterling beside her, his hand on her arm, both of them in perfectly tailored black, and Quinn looked at the back of her stepmother's head and thought she's already done the math. She's been doing the math for weeks, which was a thought Quinn had been having for a while now, which she hated having, which had started the day her father came home from the hospital after the first episode, and Nadine had sat across from Quinn at the kitchen table and said in the gentle voice of someone delivering bad news, that is somehow also not terrible news for them. Your father's heart is getting worse. And the way she said it, the flatness underneath the soft. Quinn had filed that away, the way she filed most things, quietly and carefully and without acting on it, because what was she supposed to do with a feeling like that? Go to her father and say, I think your wife is glad you're dying. She had said nothing. She had gone back to her dorm room and stared at the ceiling and thought about the expression on his face in that doorway 4 years ago. Now the funeral was over. Now the rain picked up. And Quinn walked to her car alone because there was no one she needed to walk with, and drove back to the estate alone because there was nowhere else to go, and sat in the driveway for a long moment looking at the house she had grown up in. $14 million of limestone and lead glass and heated stone floors. Her father's hands in every corner of it. None of it hers. She knew that even before she walked inside. She knew it in the parking lot of the gas station at 2 o'clock in the morning. She had known it before that even. She had known it in the specific way you know things before they arrive, when you have been paying attention to the wrong kind of quiet for a very long time. The reading of the will happened 4 days after the funeral. Quinn sat on one side of the table. Aldrich Penn sat at the head, which struck her as a choice, the way he put himself at the head, rather than the side, the way he set up the room, like a man who already knew the outcome, and was just performing the formality. He had wide silver hair and a suit that cost more than her semester of tuition. And he looked at Quinn exactly once when she walked in, and then he looked at the table and did not look at her again. Nadine sat on the other side, Sterling beside her. Aldrich began to read. The will had been revised 3 weeks before her father's death. Quinn watched his mouth move and she heard the words, and she counted them the way you counted things when the counting was all you had left to do. She heard everything: the company, the real estate, the accounts, the investments, the offshore holdings. She heard everything going to Nadine with Sterling as secondary beneficiary. She heard her name exactly once. A one-time disbursement of $10,000 subject to probate clearance. Nadine looked at Quinn across the table with an expression that was trying very hard to be sympathetic. Quinn looked back. She said nothing. Because what was there to say? Because she had known. Because the expression on Aldrich Penn's face when she walked in was the expression of a man for whom this meeting had already been over before it started. She got up from the table. She walked out. 3 days later, Nadine knocked on the door of Quinn's childhood bedroom. She said, "I want you to know this isn't personal." Quinn looked at her. Nadine said, "Your father wanted this. He wanted me and Sterling to have security. He worried about you, actually. He thought you were strong enough to make your own way." Quinn said, "When do you need me out?" Nadine said end of the week, which was 4 days, which was enough time to understand that she was 19 years old and her father was dead, and her stepmother had just given her 4 days to vacate the house she had lived in her entire life. She packed in 2 hours, mostly because there wasn't that much that was actually hers. The rest of it, the furniture and the books and the good winter coat she'd been using for 3 years, had been paid for by her father's money and was therefore subject to debate. She didn't debate it. She took her clothes. She took her laptop. She took the small frame photo of her mother that had lived on her nightstand since she was 6. She took her mother's old silver watch from the jewelry box on the dresser, the one her mother had worn every day until the day she went to the hospital and never came home. And she took the tackle box. It had been in her father's study on the bottom shelf of the bookcase nearest the window since before she could remember. Green metal paint chipped at the corners, latches gone orange with rust. He had taken it to Lake Michigan once or twice a year for as long as she could remember, which was the only time he ever seemed to stop moving. He would sit in the boat with the line in the water, and he wouldn't talk much, and she would sit beside him and not talk either. And it was the only place she had ever felt that the two of them understood each other completely without needing to explain anything. She hadn't been on the boat with him since she was 12. She took the tackle box because it was the one thing she could think of that Nadine would not want and would not notice was gone. She carried it and her suitcase and her 2 boxes down the stairs and past the kitchen and out the side door and put them in the back of her 2009 Honda Civic, and she did not look back at the house. The security guard at the end of the driveway did not look at her as she drove through. The gate closed behind her. She drove 2 miles and pulled into a church parking lot and sat there for 45 minutes looking at her hands on the steering wheel. She had $340 in her checking account. She had a car with 178,000 miles on it. She had nowhere to go. For the first 2 weeks, she parked in different lots and slept in the back seat and ate things that did not require refrigeration and called none of the 3 people she might have called because she could not explain this to anyone yet. She could not explain it because she did not fully understand it herself. She understood that her father was dead. She understood that Nadine had the house and the money and the company. She understood that something was wrong in a way that she could not articulate. She did not understand anything else. It was on the 17th night in the corner of a Walmart parking lot at 10:30, with the windows fogging from her breath and her phone at 12% battery, that she opened the tackle box. She had not opened it before. She did not know why she opened it then. Something to do, something of his to hold. She unlatched the rusty clasps. The smell hit her first. Lake water and old metal and something underneath those things that was specific and untranslatable and completely devastatingly his. She pressed her eyes closed for a moment and breathed it in and let herself have that. Just that, just a second of it. Then she opened her eyes and looked down at the box. The usual things: plastic dividers, dried rubber lures in orange and green, a coil of old fishing line, two hooks in a small paper envelope, the envelope softened with age. And below those, his old fishing reels, two of them solid and well-kept, the kind that still had value to the right buyer. She ran her fingers along the plastic dividers the way she had done as a child, when she would sit beside him in the boat and look through his things out of boredom, and he would tell her the name of each lure and what it was for. She pressed down on the bottom divider. It shifted. She froze. She pressed again. A soft click. The bottom tray lifted. Her car keys were in her hand before she knew what she was doing, and she wedged the thin metal under the edge of the plastic and pried upward, and the false bottom came up with a sound that was almost nothing, almost just the settling of old plastic. Beneath it, a small velvet pouch and a folded piece of paper. The paper yellow with age, the fold lines soft and worn like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Her hands were not steady when she unfolded it. The handwriting was his, not the formal controlled handwriting of someone writing a business document. The other kind, the kind she remembered from birthday cards when she was young before he stopped writing them by hand, rushed and slanted and private. He had written a single word at the top before anything else. Sparrow. She stopped. Nobody had called her that in 4 years. It had been his name for her, only his, from when she was small enough that she used to climb into the spaces between the furniture and sleep there, and he said she reminded him of a bird that found its rest in unexpected places. Her mother had laughed every time he said it. Quinn had pretended to be annoyed. She had not been annoyed. She had loved it more than she had ever told him. She read the rest of the letter. Sparrow, if you're reading this, things have gone the way I was afraid they would go. I need you to listen carefully because I don't have room to explain everything here. Go to First National Bank downtown, box 517. Use what's in the pouch. Don't bring anyone with you. Don't tell anyone where you're going. I know this is asking a lot. I know you have reasons not to trust me. I know I wasn't there when I should have been. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for more than I can write here. Please go to the bank, Sparrow. Look for the seam. Love, Dad. She sat in the Walmart parking lot with the letter in her hands and her phone at 7% and the windows completely fogged, and she read it twice more. She tipped the velvet pouch into her palm, a small safety deposit key. Dull brass, the number 517 stamped into the head. She sat there for a long time. Then she plugged her phone into the car charger and she waited until morning. She drove to a pawn shop before the bank. She took the 2 fishing reels from the tackle box, the ones her father had kept in there for years, and she laid them on the glass counter. The man looked at them. He said $60. She said fine. She closed the tackle box and put it back in the car. She drove to the bank. The First National Bank downtown had marble floors and the hush of places where large amounts of money live quietly. Quinn walked in wearing the same clothes she'd slept in, and 3 days of not being able to shower properly, and a jacket that was not warm enough for November in Chicago. The teller looked at her. Quinn set her driver's license and the key on the counter and said, I need to access a safety deposit box. 10 minutes later, she was in a private viewing room with a long metal box on the table in front of her. She opened the lid. No cash, no gold, no stack of negotiable documents. One manila folder sealed with a metal clasp, and on the front of it, in her father's handwriting, open alone. There was also a brass key smaller than the bank key with a piece of masking tape on it. The tape said front door in a folded piece of paper, smaller than the first letter. 3 lines. The property is in Black River Falls, Wisconsin. The GPS coordinates are attached to the folder. Find the seam in the floor, not the ceiling. She sat with that last line for a moment. Not the ceiling. Like he had anticipated something. Like he had known that whoever was looking for whatever he had hidden would look up. She opened the folder. The property was registered to a limited liability company called Blue Heron Holdings. Attached was a notarized document naming her as sole proprietor of the LLC, her name appearing nowhere in any personal probate search Nadine might have run. A separate page, GPS coordinates. She had never heard of Black River Falls in her life. She left the bank and she sat in her car and she looked at the Wisconsin coordinates on her phone and she thought about the letter, about the word sparrow, about the way he had written, "I know you have reasons not to trust me," in the same handwriting she remembered from birthday cards when she was 9. She drove to a gas station. She filled the tank. She pointed the car north. The drive was 5 hours. Illinois flattened out into Wisconsin, and Wisconsin buckled up into forest, and the forest thickened until the sky was mostly visible only in narrow strips between the trees. By the time she was on the county highway, the GPS was the only thing she trusted, and by the time she turned onto the unpaved logging road at the end of it, she wasn't sure she trusted that either. 3 miles of rutted dirt and overhanging oak branches scraping the roof of the Civic like something reaching. And then the trees pulled back, a clearing. In the center of it, a 2-story A-frame farmhouse. White once the paint peeled down to bare wood on most surfaces. One front window boarded, the porch roof sagged in the middle. Overgrown grass stood calf-high in the clearing. The whole thing had the look of a building that had been loved once, and then left suddenly, the kind of abandonment that wasn't planned. Quinn parked and killed the engine and sat for a moment. This is it, she thought. This is what 5 hours of driving gets you. She got out. The air smelled like pine and cold mud, and something underneath those things she couldn't name. She walked to the porch. The steps held. She pulled the brass key from her pocket and fitted into the deadbolt, and it turned stiffly but completely, and the door swung inward with a shriek of unlubricated hinges. The smell that came out, closed rooms and old wood, and something faintly mineral. She turned on her phone flashlight. The living room furniture was covered with canvas sheets yellowed with age, a thick layer of dust on every surface, raccoon droppings in the far corner, a stone fireplace against the inner wall, the ash in it old and gray. She swept the flashlight slowly, and then she stopped. The dust on the floor was thick, a pale carpet of it, across the entire room. But running from the front door toward the hallway, cutting cleanly through that carpet, was a set of footprints. Not hers. Her footprints were at the threshold. Soft-soled sneakers, the impression shallow. These were different, deep-grooved, large. The tread pattern of heavy tactical boots, and the edges of the displaced dust were sharp, not softened by days of settling. Sharp, recent, maybe 48 hours. Someone had been here. Her mind went immediately to Nadine, then to Aldrich Penn, then to the word inside the folder, LLC Shell Company. Something worth hiding. Something someone else might have wanted to find. She did not move for a moment. She stood in the doorway with the flashlight on the boot prints, and she thought they looked up. That was her father's instruction. Find the seam in the floor, not the ceiling. Whoever came before her had looked up the way people always looked up, because everyone expected things to be hidden in attics and ceiling panels in the high places. They had missed it. She hoped. She followed the boot prints down the hallway. They went into the study. She pushed the door open. The canvas sheet had been pulled violently off a heavy oak desk. Drawers were pulled out. Papers scattered across the floor in the careless way of someone searching fast and with frustration, not thoroughness. The bookcases along the walls were intact, books on the shelves undisturbed. The window behind the desk was intact. They had found the study. They had not found what they were looking for. She turned. She went back to the hallway and then to the kitchen. Her flashlight moved across the kitchen floor. Wood planks old dark with age and use. She crouched and moved the beam slowly, looking for what her father had told her to look for. The seam. Most old floors had irregular gaps between boards. That was settling. That was age. That was wood contracting and expanding over decades. But a seam meant something else. Something straight. something intentional. She found it near the center of the room. A rectangle maybe 4 feet by 3 feet, traced by 4 straight edges that were just slightly too clean to be natural. She ran her fingers along one side. The gap was uniform. The edges were cut rather than split. Below the rectangle, set flush into the floor, a steel ring folded flat into a recessed channel. Invisible unless you were kneeling with a flashlight at floor level. She got her fingers under the ring and lifted. The trapdoor came up on hydraulic hinges, smooth and controlled without the groan she'd expected. The cool air that came up was different from the stale air of the abandoned house. It was clean. It was moving. Active ventilation. She shone the flashlight down. Stone steps, not wood. A staircase descending into something that was neither dark nor abandoned. Because as she leaned over the opening, she could see at the bottom the faint blue-white glow of standby indicator lights. Something with power was down there. She put her foot on the first step. A voice behind her. She spun so hard she nearly went down the stairs. An old man stood in the kitchen doorway. 60-something. Heavy set in the way of men who had worked physically for decades and then slowed down. A canvas jacket with a collar turned up against the November cold. White hair closely cropped, and a quality of stillness in his face that belonged to someone who had been expecting this moment. Her heart was in her ears. She had the flashlight pointed at him like a weapon, which was absurd, but she was 19 and there was a stranger in her doorway. He held both hands up, palms out. Slowly, he said, "My name is Edgar Bell. I worked for your father for 22 years. He called me 3 months before he died and told me to come here and wait." She said, "Wait for what?" He said, "For you." She looked at him. He did not move. He did not look away. He had the face of someone who had already decided how this conversation would go and was prepared to be patient about getting there. She said, "How long have you been here?" He said, "Since last Thursday." She said, "There were boot prints in the study." He shook his head slowly. He said, "That wasn't me. I got here Thursday. Whoever made those prints was here earlier in the week. I found the place the way you found it." She said, "So someone else knows about this property." He said, "Your father thought they might find the shell company eventually. He said if they got here first, they'd look up. He was very specific about that." He paused. He said, "Look up. That's what they always do." She turned back to the trap door, looked down, the blue-white glow of the indicator lights. She said, "Did you know what was down there?" He said, "No. He told me to wait for you. He said you'd know what to do once you found it." She looked at the old man again, at the hands that were still partly raised, still showing her he meant nothing threatening, at the face that had been trained by 22 years of working for her father and therefore had a quality of patience that she recognized. Her father had trusted this man enough to call him 3 months before his death and ask him to drive to Wisconsin and wait. She said, "Edgar Bell." He said, "Yes." She said, "He talked about you." A pause. Something moved in the old man's face. He said, "He talked about you too. Every weekend when he came out here. He talked about you every time." She turned back to the trap door. She started down the stairs. 12 steps, smooth stone, not rough. Not excavated rock, but poured concrete finished on the walls and ceiling and floor below. At the bottom, motion sensor lights clicked on ahead of her warm white, revealing a corridor 10 feet long leading to a steel door. The corridor was clean, not just uncontaminated by the decay above. Clean in the specific way of a space that had been maintained. The walls had no cobwebs. The floor had no dust. She could smell faint chemical freshener in the ventilated air. This had been cared for. Consistently. She went to the steel door. It had a keypad. She stared at it. And then she noticed at the bottom left of the keypad, housing a small piece of masking tape, barely visible, the edge slightly curled. On the tape, in her father's handwriting, a 6-digit number. He had taped it there. Like he knew the keypad would mean nothing to her. Like he had refused to make her guess. She entered the code. The door opened inward with the sound of a good seal releasing. Beyond it, the first room. It was larger than the kitchen above, larger than it had any right to be in a space dug under an abandoned farmhouse in rural Wisconsin. The ceiling was 8 feet high. The walls were lined with server racks, not new, but not old either, the blinking lights of active systems in rows. And along one full wall, wooden shelving floor to ceiling, organized by year holding binders and accordion files and stacked manila folders organized by date going back 6 years. 6 years of something. She pulled a folder from the nearest shelf and opened it. The first page was a printed email chain between two email addresses she did not recognize, time-stamped 4.5 years ago. At the top of the chain, highlighted in yellow, a number $14.2 million in proprietary licensing fees transferred to an offshore account. The account was not her father's company's account. She looked at the other folders, other transfers, other dates, a trail of something being moved slowly, carefully over years. A trail of correspondence that started 5.5 years ago and continued in increasing volume until 6 months before her father's death. She put the folder back. She went to the second door. It opened onto a smaller room, floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets, and on the central table a large flat surface covered with organized stacks of bound documents. The cover page of the nearest stack, patent application, Vance Systems, original filing dated. Beneath it, a page marked with a red flag tab, unauthorized transfer of proprietary methodology. She didn't understand all of what she was reading. She understood enough. Her father's technology, the core of what made his company worth what it was worth, being transferred piece by piece in ways that were designed to be invisible to a competitor that was in the process of acquiring the building blocks of everything he had built. She stood in the second room and she thought 72 hours. She didn't know where that number came from. She would understand it later, for now it sat in her chest like a weight she couldn't identify. She went back to the first room, to the corridor, to Edgar, who had followed her down and was standing at the edge of the first room with his hands in his pockets, looking at the server racks with an expression that was either awe or grief, or the specific combination of both that came from understanding all at once what a person you respected had been doing with the years you didn't fully account for. She said, "Did you know the scale of this?" He said, "No. He told me he had been building something. He said it was important. He said it was the most important thing he'd ever done. He said it was for you." She said, "How long did it take him to build this?" Edgar said, "He bought this property 6 years ago. I helped him transport the first server rack. He said he needed a place to store data backups off-site. I believed him." She said he was lying. Edgar said he was protecting you. He said there's a difference. She looked at the corridor, at the two rooms she had found. She had not gone through the door at the far end of the corridor yet. There was a third door. She had noticed it when she came down the stairs. Narrower than the first two, the handle different, more personal. Above it, a small piece of masking tape with one word in her father's handwriting: Sparrow. She stood in the corridor and looked at that door and she breathed. Edgar said, "I'll wait here." She nodded. She walked to the third door. She opened it. Inside, a room the size of a large closet, a single chair, a small table, and on the table a laptop closed with a sticky note on the lid. The note said, "Open me, plug in, press play." She sat in the chair. She opened the laptop. It woke up without a password. A media player was already open. A single video file, the thumbnail was grainy and underlit the interior of this room. The same chair she was sitting in. The timestamp in the corner, the most recent recording was 3 weeks before his death. But there were other files below it, 18 of them, spanning 4 years. He had been coming here for 4 years, sitting in this chair recording. She opened the oldest file first. The date was 4 years ago. The room behind him was the same room she was sitting in now, but the shelves behind him had fewer boxes. The ventilation system was newer. The paint on the wall still had that specific flatness of fresh application. He looked younger than she remembered, but also more tired. He looked directly at the camera and he said, "Sparrow, if you're watching this one, you found it. Good. I need you to watch them in order, but not yet. First, I need you to find the other folder, the green one. It's in the second room on the right side of the center table. There's a tab marked Checkmate. Do not open it yet. Just find it and hold on to it. Then come back here and watch from the beginning. She sat in the chair. She breathed. She was 19 years old and her father had been dead for 6 weeks, and she was sitting in a room he had built in secret in the dark under a house in Wisconsin for her. Find the seam in the floor, not the ceiling. She thought about every weekend he had not come home. She thought about the doorway 4 years ago, the look on his face when she said what she said. She thought he wasn't there the night my mother died because he was here. He was down here in this room finishing the ventilation. She did not fully understand that yet. She would understand it soon. But right now, she sat in the chair in the third room of a facility that her father had built in the dark for 4 years. And she looked at the video screen at his face, 4 years younger, looking back at her. And she thought for the first time since the funeral, I'm listening, Dad. I'm finally listening. She closed the laptop without pressing play. She got up. She went back to the corridor. She went to the second room. She found the green folder on the right side of the center table. The tab was marked Checkmate. She did not open it. She held it. She went back to the corridor and called up the stairs. She said, Edgar. His voice came down. Yes. She said, can you get some food? Whatever is closest. I'm going to be here for a while. A pause. Then he told me you'd say something like that. She said, what did he say back? Another pause. Longer. Edgar said, he said to tell you I'm sorry I wasn't there, and I'm so proud of you for coming. She stood in the corridor with the green folder in her hands, and she looked at the door to the third room, at the single word on the masking tape above it, Sparrow. She went back inside. She sat down. She opened the laptop. She pressed play. She watched them in order. That was what he had asked her to do. And so she did it. She sat in the chair in the third room of a facility under a Wisconsin farmhouse with an old man somewhere upstairs and a green folder in her lap that she had not opened yet, and she watched. The oldest file first, 4 years ago. He was 51 in that recording, and he looked it, which was something she had not fully registered when he was alive, because you didn't look at your father that way when he was alive. You looked at him the way you always had, as a fixture, as a constant, as a thing you expected to persist. But on the screen, he was 51 and tired in a way that she could see now with the clarity of hindsight. And he was sitting in this chair, in this room with the concrete walls behind him, bare of everything, and he was looking directly at the camera, the way someone looks at a camera when they know they are talking to a specific person and want that person to feel it. He said, Sparrow, I'm going to start from the beginning so you have all of it. I don't know when you'll watch this. I don't know what will have happened by then, but I want you to have the whole truth, not pieces of it, all of it. He said, 6 years ago, I discovered something that changed everything. She watched. He explained it methodically, the way she remembered him explaining things at the dinner table when she was young, when he had still come home for dinner. The cadence of a man who had spent decades making complicated things legible for other people. Patient, precise, moving from one point to the next without redundancy. 6 years ago, one of his engineers had flagged an anomaly in their licensing structure. A pattern of small transfers, each one below the threshold, that would trigger an automatic compliance review moving proprietary methodology data to an external contractor that had no relationship with any of the company's legitimate partners. He had traced it. For 3 months, he had traced it quietly without telling anyone, because the person he would normally have told about something like this was his general counsel. Who was Aldrich Penn? Which was when he understood the shape of it. He said Aldrich wasn't working for Nadine. I want to be clear about that. I want you to understand what I'm about to tell you before you draw any conclusions about her. He paused. He said Aldrich had been approached by a competitor 5 years ago, before Nadine and I were even engaged. They had identified my company as their primary acquisition target, and they had identified Aldrich as the most effective vector of access. They offered him more money than I paid him in a decade, and they offered him equity in the combined entity post-acquisition. He said yes. He said it flatly, not with the heat of betrayal, which was how Quinn would have said it, with something past that, something that had already been processed and set down. He said everything that followed was Aldrich. Nadine didn't know. I need you to hold on to that. Quinn stopped the video. She sat with that for a moment. Because this was not what she had assumed. Because she had been picturing Nadine and Aldrich as a unit, a matched pair of deliberate cruelty, and she had been building a story around that picture for 6 weeks in gas station parking lots, in church lots, in Walmart at 10:30 at night. And now her father was telling her the picture was wrong. She pressed play. He said, I found the first evidence of Aldrich's communication with the competitor about 18 months before he approached Nadine about revising my will. Which means the will revision was not Nadine's idea. It was Aldrich's. He needed the estate structured in a way that would prevent any legal challenge to the acquisition after I was gone. He said he convinced her that I wanted this, that I had expressed it to him, that estate planning was the responsible thing to do given my health. He had documentation. He is very good at documentation. He said Nadine is not innocent of benefit. She knew the will revision disadvantaged you. I won't pretend otherwise. But she believed she was following my wishes as communicated through my lawyer. She did not know she was a piece being moved on someone else's board. He looked at the camera. He said, I am telling you this because I don't want you to spend your life hating the wrong person at the wrong intensity. Save the right amount for the right people. That was always your mother's advice, and she was usually correct. Quinn's throat did something she hadn't expected. Her mother. He had said her mother's name in the same breath as advice, with the ease of someone for whom that person was still present in some essential way, and Quinn had not been prepared for that. She paused the video again. She breathed. Then she went to the second room. She needed to understand the documents before she watched the rest of the videos. She needed the full picture, because her father was a man who built things in sequence, and she wanted to understand the sequence. The second room, the filing cabinets and the central table and the bound documents with the red flag tabs. She spent 2 hours in that room, 2 hours moving from cabinet to cabinet, from folder to folder, building the picture from the bottom up, the way she had learned to study things, starting with the facts and working toward the interpretation rather than the other way around. And here is what she learned. 6 years of deliberate, carefully hidden intellectual property transfer. Not theft in the blunt sense, but something more elegant and therefore more devastating. The systematic documentation of her father's proprietary systems in ways that looked like contractor licensing, but were in fact the construction of a parallel technological infrastructure in the competitor's name. A technology company called Meridian Group. She had heard of them. Most people in the industry had. They were younger than her father's company by 15 years, and they had grown fast, which everyone had attributed to exceptional talent. Which everyone, including Quinn's father, had apparently attributed to exceptional talent until 6 years ago, when a single engineer noticed something wrong in a licensing record. The scope of what had been transferred, the core algorithmic methodology behind 3 of the company's 5 major product lines. Not the surface applications. The underlying logic. The thing that, if removed from the company and placed elsewhere, could be rebuilt into a competitive product in 2 to 3 years, which was approximately how long Meridian Group had been accelerating. She found the folder marked Acquisition Timeline. The deal was structured to close in 72 hours. 72 hours from a date at the top of the document. She looked at the date, 48 hours ago. She stood very still, which meant she had 24 hours. 24 hours before the acquisition closed. Before the technology her father had spent his adult life building was absorbed into a competitor's portfolio under terms that had been engineered by a man who had been paid to betray him. Before 3,000 employees lost the equity stakes they had been promised when they joined the company, equity that would be worthless under the restructuring terms Meridian had negotiated. She found the folder marked Employee Impact Assessment. She opened it, 14 pages. She stood at the center table in the second room and read all 14 pages. By the time she was done, her hands were not entirely steady. 3,041 employees. Average equity stake value under current company valuation, $113,000 per person. Under Meridian's acquisition terms, which reclassified existing equity as non-transferable prior employment stock and replaced it with new issue options vesting over 7 years, effective immediate value of zero. 3,000 people who had taken lower salaries in exchange for equity stakes. 3,000 people who had made decisions about their mortgages and their children's educations and their retirements based on a number that was about to become zero because of a deal that was engineered by one man over 5 years. She went back to the corridor. She went back to the third room. She sat in the chair. She pressed play. The videos moved forward in time. 18 recordings over 4 years. He came here once or twice a year, sometimes more when things were moving faster, and he sat in this chair and he recorded. And the quality of the recordings changed as the technology changed, but his face stayed largely the same, which was the strange thing. He aged in these videos the way he aged in her memory of him, which was to say slowly and in the spaces between visits, not in a continuous line, but in steps. In the third video, he talked about Nadine. He said, I met her 18 months before Aldrich approached her about the will. I want to be accurate about the sequence. I genuinely cared for her. I want that on the record. He said she's a smart woman who was presented with a set of documents and a set of assurances by a man she had no reason to doubt. She revised the estate to benefit herself and her son. That is a thing she did. I'm not pretending otherwise. But the specific harm it caused you was not her design. It was Aldrich's. He paused. He said I wrote her a letter, in case I couldn't explain this to her directly. In the manila envelope and filing cabinet, 3 second room bottom drawer. I never sent it. I was afraid it would accelerate things before I was ready. If you find it, use your judgment about whether she should have it. Quinn stopped the video. She went to filing cabinet 3. Second room, bottom drawer. A manila envelope sealed with Nadine, written on the front in her father's handwriting. She did not open it. She held it in her hands for a moment. Then she put it in her jacket pocket and went back to the third room and sat down and pressed play. In the 7th video, he talked about Quinn. Not about the company, not about the evidence, just about her. He said you would have been 18 when I recorded this. I don't know if you're still at home or if you've gone to university yet. I hope you went somewhere good. You always wanted to go somewhere with a good philosophy program, and I always thought that was impractical, and I was wrong about that, as I have been wrong about most things that matter. He said, I know you're angry with me. I know why. I'm not going to argue with it. I spent a long time being angry at myself for the same reasons, which is not the same as being productive about it, but is also not entirely worthless. He said, I want you to know that every weekend I came here, I thought about you. Every time I sat in this room, I thought about what I was building it for. He said, the company is not what I built it for. The company is a vehicle. The thing I was trying to protect was the possibility that you could have a life that was actually yours, that no one could take from you. That was the whole point of all of it. He said, I know that's not what you needed from me when you were 15. I know what you needed was a father who came home. He looked at the camera. He said, I'm sorry, Sparrow. I've been sorry for 4 years. I should have said it to your face instead of to a camera in Wisconsin. That was a failure of courage, and I own it. She stopped the video. She sat in the chair. She thought I said it would take me 4 years to stop being angry at you, and it has been exactly 4 years, and I am sitting in a room you built for me in the dark. She pressed play. The videos continued. He talked about the evidence. He talked about the structure of what he'd built. He talked about the companies involved in the paper trails and what she would need to take to whom and in what order. He was precise. He was careful. He was in these last recordings running out of time in a way he knew about, and she hadn't. His heart had been failing for 2 years. He said it plainly in the 12th video. He said, the cardiologist gave me a timeline that I am choosing not to share with you in detail because I don't want you to feel rushed when you watch this. But I want you to know that I have structured everything with the understanding that I may not be there to walk you through it, which is why I've recorded all of this, which is why I asked Edgar to wait. He said there is a folder in the second room marked checkmate. Do not open it until you are ready to use it. Opening it does not trigger anything, but once you make the decision to use it, you will need to move quickly. He said, I cannot make that decision for you. I have spent 4 years building the mechanism, but the mechanism has no value without the person who chooses to activate it. That person has to be you. You have to decide, not because I failed to prepare, but because this is yours. All of it, including the decision. He paused. He said, I believe you'll make the right one. He said it simply, not as encouragement, as a statement of evidence-based fact. She was on the 16th video when she heard Edgar's footsteps overhead. Not the quick footsteps of someone coming to tell her food was ready. The other kind. She paused the video. She listened. Edgar said from somewhere above the trapdoor, Quinn. His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. She went up the stairs. He was standing at the kitchen window, half behind the wall, looking out at the clearing. She said, what? He said, there's a vehicle on the logging road, still about a mile out. I can see the lights through the trees. She said, could be anyone. He said, no. He said it quietly, not with drama, with the certainty of a man who had worked for 30 years in corporate environments and had developed an accurate sensor for what certain kinds of trouble looked like approaching. She said, how long? He said 6 minutes, maybe 8 if they're being careful. She thought 24 hours. She thought checkmate. She thought I haven't watched the last 2 videos. She said I have to go back down. He said, Quinn. She was already at the trapdoor. She went back down the stairs and into the 3rd room, and she sat in the chair and she pressed play on the 17th video. He was visibly thinner in this recording. That was the first thing. The tiredness she had noted in the earlier recordings had settled into something more structural, the kind of thinness that was not about food, but about the body spending its reserves on something that was costing it. He had approximately 6 weeks left to live when he recorded this. He did not know the exact number, but he knew the range. He said, Sparrow, this is the one I want you to watch last. But I'm going to record one more after this, which is the instructions. So watch them in order. But I want to say some things in this one that I don't want mixed up with the practical information. He said, I need to tell you about the night your mother died. She stopped breathing. He said, I have been trying to figure out how to say this for 4 years. I have started this particular recording 6 times and deleted it every time because I couldn't find the right way to begin. He said, there is no right way, so I'm going to say it plainly. He said, the night your mother died, I was here. In this room, I was installing the ventilation system for the 3rd room this room because the contractor I'd hired had made an error in the ductwork, and I had to fix it before the next inspection or lose another 3 months. And I got the call at 11:15 and I drove back, but I hit construction on the interstate. And by the time I got to the hospital, it was 1 o'clock in the morning and she was already gone. He stopped. He breathed. He said, I have asked myself every day since that night whether I could have left the ductwork, whether I could have made a different choice. The honest answer is that I don't know. I don't know if leaving would have changed anything. I don't know if I would have gotten there in time, even if I had left the moment the contractor called me about the error. I don't know. He said, what I know is that I wasn't there, and that is not something I can give back to you. He said, I know what you said to me 2 days later. I know what you said, and I want you to know I have never for a single day in 4 years held it against you. You were 15, and you were right about everything that mattered. I had not been there enough. This was one more not enough in a long series. You were not wrong. He said, I am telling you this not to excuse myself. I am telling you because I have been carrying the fear that you believed I chose the company over her, over you. And I want you to know what I was actually doing that night. I was building this room for you. And that does not make me not guilty of the other things, but it is the true thing. And you deserve the true thing. He looked at the camera. He said, I love you, Sparrow. I should have said it more and louder and in person, and I am so sorry that I'm saying it like this. He said, "Go watch the last one now." She sat in the chair. She did not move for a moment. She was 19 years old and her father had been dead for 6 weeks, and she had just watched him tell her in this room that the night her mother died, he had been finishing the ventilation system for the room she was currently sitting in. For her. Not for the company. For her. Overhead, she could hear the distant crunch of gravel. Coming closer. She pressed play on the 18th video. He said, "This is the practical one, so stay with me." He said in the green folder marked checkmate, "You will find a power of attorney I executed before a notary public on the date stamped at the top. I executed it with the specific understanding that I might not be present to complete what I had started. The power of attorney designates you as my authorized representative to submit the evidence package to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the SEC's whistleblower program on my behalf." He said the evidence package is complete. I spent 6 years building it. It contains the email records, the financial transfer documentation, the patent filings, the parallel development timelines, and the direct communications between Aldrich Penn and Meridian Group's board. It is sufficient. I had a forensic accountant review it without telling her what it was for. She told me it was airtight. He said what it cannot do is submit itself. What it cannot do is make the choice. That part is yours. He said, "I want to be honest with you about what this involves. Once you submit it, there will be a period of legal proceedings that will disrupt your life. There may be people who are not pleased with you. Meridian Group has resources and they will use them. This is not a safe, easy thing. I'm not going to tell you it is." He said, "But here is what I can tell you. 3,041 people work for my company. They took equity stakes instead of higher salaries because they believed in what we were building. Under Meridian's acquisition terms, they lose everything. Every one of them. Because of a deal that Aldrich Penn engineered over 5 years. He said I could not stop it myself. My lawyers are his lawyers. My board had been compromised. My health had compromised me further. I ran out of time." He said, "You didn't." He looked at the camera. He said, "I am not telling you what to choose. I am telling you what is true." He said, "You asked me once what I actually did in this cabin all those weekends. You were 12. I told you I was fishing. That was partly true and almost entirely a lie. And I'm sorry for that." He said what I was actually doing was building something so that someday you could walk into it and have everything you needed. He said, "The rest is up to you." The video ended. The screen went black. She sat in the chair in the third room of a facility her father had spent 4 years building, and she held the green folder in her hands, and she did not move. Overhead closer now. The unmistakable sound of a vehicle in the clearing. An engine cutting off. A door opening. She heard Edgar's feet move quickly to the kitchen window. She heard him say quietly to himself, "There are two of them." She held the green folder. She thought about 3,041 people. She thought about her father in this chair in the 17th video, looking thinner than she had ever seen him, telling her about a night 4 years ago when he had been installing ventilation ductwork and her mother had died. She thought about what he had said. "You didn't run out of time." She heard a knock at the front door of the cabin above her. Then less politely a fist. Then Edgar's voice raised, "Can I help you?" A different voice, male, controlled. The voice of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. The voice said, "We're looking for Quinn Vance. We have reason to believe she may be in distress." And Quinn sat in the third room with the green folder in her hands, and she thought he sent 2 people to a cabin in rural Wisconsin to check on my distress. She thought Aldrich Penn. She thought he found the shell company. She thought they came here before me and they looked up and they found nothing and they came back. She stood up. She picked up the green folder. She went to the corridor. She went to the second room and she pulled the manila envelope from her jacket pocket, the one with Nadine on the front in her father's handwriting, and she put it carefully in the center of the table where it would be found. Then she went to the first room. She opened the laptop case sitting on the shelf beside the servers, and she put the laptop inside it. She put the external hard drives in beside it. She put the green folder in last. She heard movement above her. Not Edgar's movement, something heavier. She had maybe 3 minutes, maybe less. She looked at the corridor. At the end of it was the door that she had come in through, the steel door, the one with the keypad. But she had noticed something when she first came through. On the wall opposite the steel door behind one of the server racks, a handle. She had noted it and filed it. She went to the server rack and moved it 6 inches. A door in the wall, steel like the other but narrower. No keypad, just a handle and a deadbolt, the kind you open from the inside. She unlocked the deadbolt. She pulled the handle. A short corridor, concrete, narrowing in the dark ahead of her. Cold air. Moving air. Edgar, she said, not loud but clearly. His footsteps on the stairs. Quick. He came into the corridor. He said, there are two of them. One is Aldrich Penn. I recognized him from photos in your father's files. She said, is there a second way out of the house? Not the front door. He said there's a cellar door on the north side of the house, connected to the basement. She said, does this tunnel connect to the basement? He looked at the narrow corridor. He said, your father never told me about this. She said, he was precise about what he told people. She held the laptop case. She looked at Edgar. She said, I need to get to a city. I need the FBI. I have a power of attorney and a complete evidence package, and I have maybe 24 hours before a deal closes that destroys everything in this room. Edgar looked at her for a moment. He said, I have a truck on the other side of the ridge. I parked it there when I heard their car the first time earlier this week. I didn't want them to see my plates. She said, how far? He said, half a mile through the trees. She said, can you get there from the cellar door? He said, yes. She looked back at the server room, at the racks and the files and the 6 years of what her father had built. She said, is there a way to lock this from outside? He said, the steel door. She said, if I pull it shut behind me and reset the keypad, do they get in? He said, not without the code. She said, does anyone else have the code? He said, only you. She thought about the third room, about the chair, about the laptop that was now in the case she was holding, about 18 videos recorded over 4 years. She said, okay. She said it the way you said a word when the word was a decision and the decision was made. She said, okay. She went back through the steel door and she pulled it shut behind her and she heard the lock engage, and then she entered 6 digits on the keypad and the indicator light went from green to red, and she thought, you can knock on it. All you want, Aldrich. You're not getting in. She went back to the narrow corridor. Edgar was already moving. She followed him into the dark. The tunnel was 200 meters of cold concrete and moving air, in the darkness that existed only underground. Not the darkness of a room with curtains drawn, but the darkness of a place that had never expected light. Edgar went first. He had taken the flashlight from the wall bracket near the entrance, which was the first indication that he had known about this tunnel, or had found it during his 4 days of waiting, or had been told just enough by Elliot to be useful without being told everything. Quinn did not ask. She followed the white circle of the flashlight, and she breathed the cold tunnel air, and she held the laptop case against her chest with both arms. She counted steps, because counting was something to do that was not thinking about everything she had just watched on a screen. At step 47, Edgar said without turning around, he talked about you every weekend. She said, you mentioned that. He said, I know. But I want to be specific. He said, he didn't talk about your grades or your plans or whether you were going to study something practical. He talked about the things you said, the specific observations you made. He kept a notebook. She said a notebook. He said a small green one. He carried it in his jacket. When you said something that struck him, he would write it down when he got home. She processed that. She said, I didn't know that. He said most children don't know the catalog their parents are keeping. They walked. The tunnel curved slightly at the midpoint and then straightened again and began to rise. At step 163, The ceiling lifted and the air changed, still cold, but now with a thread of pine in it. Something from outside finding its way in through gaps in the structure. She said, "How long did he build this in?" Edgar said, "I don't know exactly. I helped him bring in the first server equipment 4 years ago. The tunnel was already here then." She said he built the tunnel first. He said it seemed so. She thought he built the way out first, before he built anything to put inside, which was either the action of a very careful man or a very frightened one, or both. Which she was beginning to understand was a description that fit her father in a way she had not had the vocabulary for when he was alive. At step 200, the tunnel ended at a steel door identical to the one at the other end. Same design, same deadbolt, same handle. No keypad on this side. Edgar unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the door open, and the Wisconsin night came in all at once, cold and pine-smelling, and vast in the way that only places without city light were vast. They were in the trees, not close to the cabin. Half a mile through pines, the clearing invisible from here, the lights of whatever vehicle Aldrich Penn had arrived in not visible through the density of the forest. Edgar pulled the door shut behind them. The truck was where he said it was. A dark blue pickup, older, the kind of truck that existed in rural Wisconsin by the thousands and attracted no attention from anyone. He had parked it in a pull-off between two large oaks well off the logging road in the way of someone who had thought about not being found. She got in. He started the engine. He did not turn on the headlights until they were on the county highway, moving away from the logging road, the trees closing behind them like water closing over a stone. She said, "Madison." He said, "What about it?" She said, "That's where the FBI field office is. I looked it up while I was reading the files." He said, "That's an hour and 20 minutes. She said, "Drive." He drove. She opened the laptop case on her lap and took out the green folder. The folder marked "Checkmate." She opened it. Inside, a bound document, legal weight paper notarized. The power of attorney. Her father's signature on the last page, the signature she recognized from every birthday card until the card stopped, and below it, a notary seal dated 3 weeks before his death. She read the relevant section. "I, Elliot Robert Vance, hereby designate Quinn Elliott Vance as my authorized legal representative for the purpose of submitting the evidence package described in Exhibit A to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division and to the Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of the Whistleblower, said submission to be made on my behalf following my death and at the sole discretion of my designated representative." Exhibit A, a full index of the evidence. Every folder, every hard drive, cross-referenced. She read it twice. She turned to Edgar. She said he had a forensic accountant review the evidence. He said he mentioned that. She said, "Do you know who?" He said no. He was careful about what he told me. She said he was careful about what he told everyone. A pause. Edgar said he was trying to protect the people around him from knowing things that could make them targets. She said, "Including me." He said, "Especially you." She sat with that. She looked at the dark highway ahead, the headlights cutting a path through the pine forest. The sky overhead still a deep, flat black with the faintest suggestion of gray at the horizon, where morning was considering its options. She said, "Edgar, when he called you 3 months before he died, what exactly did he say?" Edgar was quiet for a moment. He said, "I need you to go to the cabin in Wisconsin and wait. I don't know when she'll come. It might be days, it might be weeks, it might be longer. But she'll come." He said, "I asked him why he was so sure. He said, Elliot told me because she's mine, because she looks for things until she finds them. She always has." Quinn looked at the window, at the Wisconsin trees going past. "She thought I wasn't looking for anything. I was sitting in a Walmart parking lot at 10:30 at night eating crackers. And then she thought, but I opened the tackle box. After 2 weeks, after sitting with it in the back seat and not opening it, because opening it meant deciding something. She opened it, which was she supposed a version of looking. She said, I need to call ahead. He said to the FBI. She said, I can't walk in there. At what time is it? He said, 2:15. She said, I cannot walk into an FBI field office at 2 in the morning with a laptop and a folder and a power of attorney and expect to be taken seriously by whoever is on duty. He said no. She said there has to be a way to, and then she stopped. Because in the outer pocket of the laptop case, she had not looked in the outer pocket, and now her fingers found something in there. A business card, old, the edges soft, and she pulled it out and held it under the dome light. Special Agent Renata Osei, FBI Financial Crimes Division, Chicago Field Office, and a cell number handwritten in pen on the back, her father's handwriting. She turned the card over. On the back below the cell number, 2 words, she knows. Quinn sat in the dark truck on a Wisconsin highway at 2 in the morning and held a business card her father had left in a laptop case and read the words she knows. She said Edgar. He said yes. She said he knew an FBI agent. He said apparently. She said he told her. Before he died. A pause. He said he was more prepared than either of us realized. She said he was more prepared than any of us realized. She called the number. It rang 4 times and she was already composing the voicemail in her head when it connected and a woman's voice came through, awake, the alertness of someone who slept with their phone on and answered it without confusion. She said, Osei. Quinn said, my name is Quinn Vance. Elliot Vance was my father. He told me to call you. A silence, not the silence of confusion, the silence of recognition. Agent Osei said, where are you? Quinn said, driving to Madison. I have a power of attorney, a complete evidence package, in 22 hours before the Meridian Group acquisition closes. Another silence. Shorter this time. Osei said, don't go to the Madison office. Come to Chicago, I'll meet you. Quinn said, it's 2 in the morning. Osei said, I know what time it is. She said, your father came to me 11 months ago. He showed me what he had. I've been waiting for someone to bring me the submission documents. Quinn said he came to you 11 months ago. Osei said he couldn't submit it himself, not without the power of attorney being active, which required, Quinn said, me. Osei said yes. She said, Quinn, your father was one of the most careful people I have encountered in 20 years of financial crimes investigation. He built that evidence package like a vault. All we needed was the key. She paused. She said, drive to Chicago. Quinn looked at Edgar. He had heard the whole thing. He said 4 hours. We can be there by 6. She told Osei 6 in the morning. Osei said, I'll have coffee. The call ended. Quinn sat in the seat with the phone in her hands, and she thought about 11 months ago. Her father alive, still driving to Chicago to meet with an FBI agent, and handing over the framework of what he had built, telling the agent, I cannot submit this myself. I need my daughter to do it. 11 months ago, she had been in her dormitory room angry at him not returning his calls with the passive cruelty of 19 and certain and wronged. Annie had driven to Chicago and built the last piece of the mechanism. She said he knew he was running out of time. Edgar said he was trying to get everything in place before he did. She said he never told me any of it. He said he was afraid that if he told you, you would try to help in ways that would make you a target before you had the protection of the legal structure. She said he should have told me. Edgar said yes. He said it simply, without hedging. He said he should have. He knew it. He told me he should have. But he was a man who was better at building things than at saying things, and sometimes those two capacities don't overlap the way we want them to. She looked at the highway. She said, he was afraid I wouldn't come. Edgar said no, he wasn't afraid of that. She said, he said you'd say something like that. He glanced at her. She said, when I told you to get food and said I'd be a while, you said he told you I'd say something like that. He said you would settle in. He said, once you found your way into something, you didn't leave until you understood it. She said, he was describing himself. Edgar said most parents are. They drove in silence for a while. The forest gave way to towns. The towns had gas stations and diners with their lights on, and the world between 2 and 5 in the morning, when the people who are awake are either working very hard or in some kind of trouble. She supposed both. She opened the laptop. She watched the last 2 minutes of the 18th video again. her father looking at the camera saying, "The rest is up to you." She closed the laptop. She thought about what the rest was. At 6:43 in the morning, Quinn Vance walked into the Chicago field office of the FBI with a laptop case, a green folder, and an old man behind her who had driven 4 hours through the dark without complaint. Agent Renata Osei met her in the lobby. She was 50 or close to it with the posture of someone who had been very tall since she was young and had made peace with it. She wore a suit that had been put on quickly, and she had coffee as promised, 2 cups in a carrier, and she looked at Quinn with the quality of someone who was seeing something they had been waiting for long enough that the seeing of it was its own kind of emotion. She said, "You look like him." Quinn said, "Everyone keeps saying that." Osei said, "It's true." She said, "Come with me." The conference room was on the 3rd floor. It had a glass wall looking over the main floor of the field office, which was not as busy at 6:45 in the morning as it would be in 3 hours, but was not empty either. 3 other agents came in within 15 minutes. A fourth joined by video from a screen on the wall. Quinn set the laptop case on the table. She set the green folder beside it. She set the power of attorney on top. She said, "My father built this evidence package over 6 years. He had it reviewed by a forensic accountant before he died. He designated me as his authorized representative through the power of attorney dated," she pointed to the seal, 3 weeks before his death. She said, "The Meridian Group acquisition closes in 21 hours. The deal was structured to eliminate 3,041 employees' equity stakes valued at approximately $113,000 each under terms that were negotiated by Aldrich Penn, who was simultaneously acting as my father's general counsel and as a paid agent of Meridian Group. She said I would like to submit this evidence package on behalf of my father's estate." The room was quiet for a moment. Agent Osei looked at the power of attorney. She looked at the evidence folder index. She looked at Quinn. She said, "We've been waiting for this for 11 months. She picked up her phone. She said, "Let's get started." They worked for 14 hours. Not Quinn primarily, the agents. But Quinn was there for all of it, answering questions, when she could, accessing the laptop when they needed to pull specific files, watching agents who had spent their careers finding threads and following them encounter a thread that had already been fully wound. By noon, they had confirmed the financial transfer documentation. By 3 in the afternoon, they had made contact with the SEC. At 4:17, with 4 hours and 43 minutes before the acquisition deadline, a federal judge signed the injunction that froze the Meridian Group transaction pending investigation. At 5:41, Aldrich Penn was arrested at his office on the 44th floor of a building in downtown Chicago by 4 agents who had, according to the report Quinn read later, given him enough time to set down his coffee before they put the handcuffs on, which she found quietly satisfying. The Meridian board members named in the email chains were addressed by end of day in a series of actions she only partially tracked because by 5 in the afternoon, she was so tired she was holding herself upright by what felt like pure stubbornness, and Edgar had fallen asleep in a chair in the corner of the waiting room with his coat over himself like a blanket. At 7 in the evening, Agent Osei came to find her. She sat down across from Quinn and she said, "The injunction holds. The acquisition is blocked pending full investigation. Aldrich Penn has been charged with 6 counts, including wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Meridian's executives are looking at similar exposure." She said, "The investigation will take time. There will be proceedings. It will not be simple." Quinn said, "I know." Osei said, "Your father anticipated that. There are funds held in trust specifically to support the legal costs of recovering the IP." Quinn said, "Of course there are." Osei looked at her. She said he was thorough. Quinn said he had 4 years. Osei was quiet for a moment. She said, "He talked about you when he came to see me. He said you were the only person he was completely certain would do the right thing with this." Quinn said he couldn't have known that. Osei said, "He said, I can't know what she'll choose. But I know her character, and I built this so that her character is the only thing required." Quinn looked at the table. She said, "He built an evidence package so comprehensive that the only thing it needed was someone willing to deliver it. Osei said, yes. Quinn said, and he believed I was that person. Osei said, yes. She sat with that, he said. She thought he didn't know I was sitting in a Walmart parking lot. He didn't know I had $340 in a car with 178,000 miles on it and nowhere to go. But he did know apparently that wherever I was, I would open the tackle box eventually. Osei said, there's one more thing. She slid a document across the table. Quinn looked at it. It was a letter, handwritten, her father's handwriting, addressed to Nadine. Osei said, your father left a copy with me as well. He asked me to deliver it to her if the investigation proceeded to arrest. Quinn said he left a copy here and one in the evidence room. Osei said he was very thorough about the letter. Quinn said he couldn't send it himself. Osei said he was afraid it would compromise the investigation timeline if Nadine had warning. Quinn said so he made multiple copies and left them in multiple places. She thought one in Wisconsin for me to find and choose whether to leave. One here for the agent to deliver officially. He had thought about the letter from every angle. She said, can I read it? Osei said he left instructions that it was for Nadine. But he also left this. She put a sealed envelope on the table. On the front in her father's handwriting, for Quinn after everything is done. Quinn looked at it. She said he made a copy of that too. Osei said, there's one in the evidence room as well. She said, in case I missed the one in Wisconsin. Osei said, he said she'll find one or the other. She always finds things. Quinn picked up the envelope. She held it. She did not open it yet. She said, how do we handle notifying Nadine? Osei said, we would normally send agents. Quinn said, can I go? Osei looked at her. Quinn said, he wrote her a letter. He thought she should have it from a person, not from agents arriving at her door. I'd like to be there. Osei was quiet for a moment. She said, we'll have 2 agents with you. Discreet. Quinn nodded. She stood up. She looked at Edgar asleep in the chair with his coat over himself. She thought he waited 4 years and drove 4 hours at 2 in the morning and sat in a waiting room for 6 hours without asking anything. She went to the waiting room doorway. She said Edgar. He woke up cleanly the way old men who had spent time in places that required alertness woke up. Not groggy, just present again. She said, I'm going to see Nadine. He said, do you want me to come? She thought about it. She said, go get some real sleep. I'll call you. He looked at her for a long moment. He said, your father would be... She said, I know. She said it gently, not to cut him off, just because she knew and the knowing was enough. She went. The house in Lake Forest was exactly as she remembered it from outside. The limestone facade and the curved driveway and the leaded glass catching the last of the evening light. She had lived here for her entire life, and she had driven away from it 17 days ago with a suitcase and a tackle box and had not expected to come back. The agents waited in the car. She walked up the drive. She knocked. A housekeeper opened the door, looked at her, called for Nadine. Nadine came to the front hallway in a silk robe, which meant it was after 9, and she had been preparing for bed, and she looked at Quinn, and her face did something complicated. Surprise was part of it, but not all. She said, Quinn. Quinn said, can I come in? A pause. Nadine said yes. The sitting room off the main hallway, the one her father had used for meetings he didn't want to have in his office, the one with 2 chairs by the window and a painting of a lake on the north wall that her mother had chosen. They sat. Quinn said Aldrich Penn was arrested this evening. Nadine's face went still. Not surprised. Not exactly. Something more like a person hearing a sound they have been half expecting for a long time, finally in a specific register. She said, what did he do? Quinn told her, all of it. Not the whole 6 years, but the shape of it, the architecture. Aldrich's arrangement with Meridian Group predating his arrangement with Nadine by 5 years. The will revision, the acquisition, the evidence package her father had spent 4 years building. Nadine listened. She did not speak. When Quinn finished, Nadine was looking at the painting of the lake, the painting her mother had chosen, and her hands were folded in her lap with the stillness of someone using stillness to stay above water. She said, "He told me Elliot wanted this. The will revision." Quinn said, "I know." She said, "He had documentation." Quinn said, "My father knew he would." He said Aldrich was very good at documentation. Nadine closed her eyes. She said, "I thought I was following your father's wishes." Quinn said, "I know." She said, "I thought he was sick and we had talked about planning for the future." And Aldrich said this was what he had discussed with Elliot and I. She stopped. Quinn waited. Nadine opened her eyes. She said, "I should have asked you. I should have talked to you." Quinn said yes. She said it without heat, just as a fact. She said, "But that is not the same as what Aldrich did." Nadine looked at her. Quinn pulled the manila envelope from her jacket. She said, "My father wrote you a letter. He kept copies in multiple places. He wanted to make sure you got it." She put it on the table between them. Nadine looked at the envelope, at the handwriting on the front. Something moved through her face that Quinn did not have a name for and did not try to find one for. She said, "He knew, the whole time." Quinn said he knew Aldrich had set you up. He said you weren't innocent of benefit, but that you didn't design the harm. Nadine said, "He wrote me a letter." Quinn said he was afraid if he sent it to you, you'd warn Aldrich. He needed time to complete the evidence package. Nadine said he built the whole thing before he died. Quinn said 4 years. Nadine sat with that. She said, "Where is Sterling?" Quinn said, "I believe he's upstairs. The agents outside will need to speak with him eventually, but he's not being charged with anything tonight." Nadine said he didn't know. Quinn said, "I know that too." Nadine looked at the envelope on the table between them. She said, "What do you want from me?" Quinn said, "My father's company is going to need its assets unfrozen through probate. The will revision will be challenged. I have the original will and a forensic accountant's review of the financial transfers." She said, "I'm not asking you to give up everything you have. I'm asking you to not fight the investigation." Nadine said, "Cooperate." Quinn said, "Yes." Nadine looked at the lake painting. She said, "What happens to Sterling?" Quinn said if he cooperates with investigators and had no actual knowledge of Aldrich's scheme, he's a witness, not a defendant. Nadine said he didn't know. Quinn said, "Tell the investigators that, with everything you have." A silence. Nadine picked up the envelope. She did not open it. She held it with both hands the way Quinn had held it in the facility under the Wisconsin farmhouse, the weight of it being something other than paperweight. She said, "I'm sorry for what I did to you, for how you've been living." Quinn said, "I know." She stood. She said, "Open the letter." She went to the door. She said, "I'll have someone call Sterling down. He needs to hear this from you, not from the agents." She left. 2 months later, Quinn Vance sat in the office that had been her father's in the company, that had been his in the chair that had been his, and she signed a document that made her the chief executive of Vance Systems at the age of 20. The probate court had validated the original will. The challenged revision, signed under fraudulent circumstances, as evidenced by the testimony of 3 former Aldrich Penn employees, and the email records from the evidence package had been voided. Meridian Group's board was in the middle of a federal investigation that would, according to the financial press, take years to fully resolve. Aldrich Penn had entered a not guilty plea, which his attorneys were apparently going to have difficulty maintaining, given the 6 years of email records, financial transfers, and forensic accounting that Quinn's father had left behind in a concrete room under a farmhouse in Wisconsin. Quinn had been in this office twice in her life before this morning. She looked at it now. The desk, the bookshelves, the window that faced north catching the lake forest light that was clear in winter and gold in summer. On the desk, the small green notebook. Edgar had found it in the facility in the desk drawer, in the third room after the investigators had finished their sweep. He had given it to her without opening it. She had opened it. It was what he had described in the video. Her words written down, dates going back years, things she had said that she didn't remember saying rendered in his handwriting, sometimes with context, sometimes alone. She was 12 and said the problem with knowing what you want is that then you know when you don't have it. She was 15 and said, I think the difference between courage and stubbornness is whether it turns out you were right. She was 8 and said, does the moon know it's reflecting or does it just think it's shining? She sat with that one for a while. She closed the notebook. She signed the document. Her first official act as CEO was to open a board resolution establishing the Elliott Vance Employee Equity Restoration Trust. The trust held, as of this morning, $340 million, which was the aggregate value of the equity stakes that 3,041 employees had been promised when they joined the company and had come close to losing when the acquisition was 24 hours from closing. None of them were losing it. The equity was not being given to them. It was being returned to them. There was a specific difference which the trust's language made explicit. She had fought with the board about the language. The board had wanted provided to each eligible employee. She had changed it to restored to each eligible employee as Elliott Vance always intended. As Elliott Vance always intended. She had put her father's name in the legal language of a corporate document. He would have found this, she thought, both unnecessary and correct. Her second official act was to establish a scholarship fund at the university she had attended briefly before everything. The scholarship was for students who had left school due to circumstances outside their control. Bereavement, financial collapse, family emergency. The ones who had needed to stop but intended to return. She named it the Diana Vance Return Scholarship, after her mother, who had wanted, of all things, to return to school herself, had been planning to when Quinn was younger and had not gotten the chance. The third thing she did was make a phone call. She called Edgar. He picked up on the second ring. She said, I'm signing the paperwork today. He said, I know. She said, the company. He said, good. She said, I'm going back to Wisconsin next week. He said, to do what? She said, nothing. I just want to go back. A pause. He said, he would have liked that. She said, I know. She said, Edgar, thank you for waiting. He said, it wasn't a sacrifice. He was my friend for 22 years. And he stopped. She said, I know. They said goodbye. She looked at the window, the Lake Forest light clear in winter. She thought about what she was going to do with a $14 million house that she had no interest in living in. She thought sell it and give the proceeds to the trust. He would find that correct and probably unnecessary, which was how she intended to do most things from this point forward. She looked at the green notebook. She thought about the facility, about the 3 rooms, about 18 videos recorded over 4 years by a man sitting in a chair in the dark talking to a camera. She was going to go back. She was not going to renovate it. She was not going to turn it into something else. She was not going to change the concrete walls or the server racks or the trap door or the chair in the 3rd room where her father had sat and said things he should have said in person. She was going to go back because it was a place he had built for her and she intended to keep it. She was going to go back because she was his and the facility was his and the notebook in her hands was his and the name on the scholarship was her mother's and the equity trust had his name in the legal language. And all of this was the territory of people who were gone, and the only way to do right by the gone was to keep going. She stood up. She picked up the notebook. She picked up the envelope she had been carrying for 2 months, the one Agent O.C. had given her, the one her father had labeled "For Quinn after everything is done." She had not opened it yet. She sat back down. She opened it. His handwriting. 2 pages. The same rushed, slanted private script as the letter in the tackle box. He wrote, Sparrow, if you're reading this, everything is done. Or the main parts of it are done anyway. The rest will take time and that's all right. Things that matter usually do. He wrote, I want to tell you something I failed to say in person, which is apparently my most consistent failure. He wrote, "The company is not the point. I want that on the record. I know it's been the center of this whole thing, the mechanism and the evidence and the acquisition and all of it. But the company is not the point." He wrote, "You are the point." He wrote, "Every version of every decision I made in the last 6 years was made with one question: is Quinn protected? Not is Quinn wealthy, or is Quinn set up for success, or is Quinn positioned well? Is Quinn protected?" He wrote, "I should have found a way to tell you that while I was alive. I should have found 1,000 different ways to say it because apparently I only knew how to say things in basements and notebooks and legal documents, and that was not enough. That was never enough." He wrote, "I know about the fight. I know what you said. I am not writing this to forgive you because there is nothing to forgive. You were 15 and right, and I was absent and also right, which is the most complicated kind of both of us being right. And I hope someday you find a way to let yourself off the hook for it." He wrote, "I kept a notebook. You've probably found it by now. There are 43 entries over 7 years. I want you to know that I chose each one because it was the thing you said that I wanted to carry with me. Not the things you said about me, the things you said about the world, the way your mind worked on problems, the way you turned things over until you found the angle nobody else had found." He wrote, "You were 8 years old, and you asked if the moon knows it's reflecting or just thinks it's shining." He wrote, "That has been my favorite thing anyone has ever said. For 12 years, I'm sorry I never told you." He wrote, "The rest of the notebook is yours. Fill it however you want, or don't fill it at all. It doesn't owe you anything, and neither do I mean to say it does." He wrote, "I love you. I have loved you in basements and on boats and through cameras and in legal documents and in every other inadequate form I had available. I am sorry I did not find the better form sooner." He wrote, "Go do the rest, Sparrow. Go do all of it." He wrote, "The road is yours." She sat in her father's chair in her father's office with the letter in her hands. The Lake Forest light came through the window. She did not cry for long. She thought, gotten reasonably good at the efficient version, at letting something through all the way and then setting it down and continuing. She folded the letter. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket next to the notebook. She stood up. She was 20 years old. She had a company and a trust in a scholarship fund in a concrete facility under a Wisconsin farmhouse with 3 rooms and a laptop and 18 videos and a chair. And she had the tackle box. It was on the shelf in the 3rd room where she had set it the day she arrived before any of the rest of it. She had asked specifically that it not be cataloged as evidence that it be left where she put it, which it had been, because it was a fishing tackle box, because it was not evidence of anything except a father who had built an enormous thing and put the first key to all of it in the most ordinary place he could think of. Next week, she was going back to Wisconsin. She was going to take the tackle box off the shelf. She was going to put it somewhere she could see it. Not as a memorial, as a reminder. Because someday she was going to be in a room with a difficult problem, and she was going to need to remember what it looked like to look for the seam when everyone else was looking at the ceiling. She walked to the door of the office. She opened it. The company was in front of her. Her people. 3,041 of them. She thought, "I am Elliot Vance's." And then she thought, "I am Quinn Vance's," which is its own thing, which is, it turns out, the whole point. She walked through the door.